It is my pleasure to welcome everyone to the dissertation defense of Alaa Albashayreh. His thesis is entitled Evaluating Patient-Centered Outcomes in Palliative Care and Advanced Illness Using Natural Language Processing and Big Data Analytics. I'm going to hand it over to Alaa, who will share with us the work he's done for his dissertation.
Yes.
You're welcome.
Right. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me today as I present my work from over the last 5 years. Thanks to my family, my wife, Iman, Leanne, Rafif, Hakam, my kids, my friends are here, and thanks to my committee, especially my mentor, Dr. Stephanie Gilbertson-White, for all the support and wisdom I received, as well as from my committee members. So my presentation is about evaluating patient-centered outcomes in palliative care and advanced illness using natural language processing and big data analytics. And this is the agenda for today's presentation. When I joined the PhD program 5 years ago, I really wanted to do something related to the experiences I have witnessed in clinical practice. So I worked as a nurse in critical care. I have seen several people suffer through the dying process and at end of life. And working in the ICU, I also thought at numerous times we provide ICU care that is unnecessary. And many people agree with me, and we know from literature that patients with advanced illness often experience symptom burdens, psychological and spiritual distress, and receive unwanted treatments. So by advanced illness, I mean an advanced stage of the chronic condition, such as advanced cancer. And it's estimated that about 12 million people live in the US with at least one advanced illness. For these reasons, numerous reports emphasize the importance of providing care that is consistent with what patients really want, consistent with their preferences and goals. For example, the National Academy of Medicine emphasized the need for measuring the patient-centered aspects of care, which is really the focus of my dissertation. So we know from literature that measuring the extent to which care provided to patients is really aligned with their preferences is really difficult and challenging. For one part, we know that seriously ill patients might be too sick to report about the quality of care and whether the care meets their expectations. We also know that surrogates, who are people the patients authorized to make decisions on their behalf, based on literature, there is misalignment between what they want and what they suggest for care compared to the documented preferences provided by patients. So we know there is increased use of EHR data or electronic health records data, and we generate more data. And there is this concept of big data. So we know from EHR perspective that most of the care processes and outcomes are documented in EHR. So I thought, why not to look at these notes to better understand the patient-centered aspects of care. There is the emergence of big data analytics, by which I mean the use of artificial intelligence, information sciences, in order to analyze data at scale. So this is the approach that I took. I used EHR data, data analytics, in order to obtain real-world evidence about patient-centered care. And particularly, I used natural language processing, which is basically automating information extraction from EHR. So the overarching hypothesis of my dissertation is it's feasible to generate real-world evidence on patient-centered outcomes in advanced illness and end of life from EHR data using NLP and big data analytics. And I address two main aims in my dissertation were identify documentation of and assist variations in aspects of patient-centered care in EHR data, and examine the effect of referral to palliative care or specialist palliative care on the receipt of aggressive treatments and goal discordant care. And this conceptual framework depicts the main concepts in my dissertation. I address aim one in the left side of the framework. I address symptoms, pain, dyspnea, anxiety, patient concerns, and preferences for treatments. I also, for aim two, I use the preferences. I use also procedure codes from the last month of life in order to measure two concepts: concordance. In my case, I measured discordant care and aggressive treatments. And I used 3 data sets in my dissertation, thanks to my mentor, Dr. Gilbertson White, for allowing me to use the cancer data, structured data for nearly 16,000 patients, notes data for cancer patients, and I got a small grant to extract palliative care data, thanks to the ICTS people for helping me to really extract palliative care outcomes and notes for patients who were referred to palliative care. So I managed to map these 3 data sets in order to obtain a subset of data for 4,300 dissidents who received care at University of Iowa hospitals and the clinics during 2017 to 2020. And in the table in the middle of the slide, you can see that the demographics are really consistent with Iowa demographics, but I wanted to point out that it's a fairly older age, 69-year-old as an average, and about 63% of the sample in my study had cancer diagnosis. About 28 of them had multimorbidity, which I define as having at least 2 chronic conditions based on their diagnosis codes. I also should mention that 37% of them were referred to palliative care. As preliminary work, I wanted to understand how the extent to which patient care is aligned with patient preferences. So I did this systematic scoping review focused on goal concordance, which I define as the alignment between preferences and the care provided. And the main findings are, first of all, there is no consensus in defining and operationalizing goal concordance. The proportions of patients in the 22 studies included in this review is 6% to 99%. This is a very wide range. And when I looked the methods used to operationalize concordance, there were variations. Another thing is that another fact about this review is that perceptions of patients, providers, caregivers was the main source of data to understand concordance. A few studies use EHR data, so I thought, why not to use this path in order to look at the preferences documented in EHR and procedure codes, the actual care provided to the patients, rather than the perceptions. So the American Academy of Medicine, of Palliative Medicine, emphasized several metrics used to assess the quality of care in advanced illness, palliative care, and at end of life. And this diagram depicts 10 elements of what matters to patients. Assessing symptoms, 3 common symptoms that I included in my dissertation. Identifying surrogate decision maker, which is defined as a person whom the patient authorizes to make decisions on their behalf when the patient is incapable of making decisions. Addressing concerns, spiritual and religious concerns, and death and dying concerns. And I consider these a very individualized aspects of care that need attention based on numerous reports, as I emphasized earlier. And finally, advanced care planning, goals of care discussion, which is basically a conversation between practitioner and the patient and their significant others about the plans for treatments. Comfort measures only, which is basically providing care that is not really high intense focusing on the symptoms aspect, improving the quality of life of patients. On the other hand, there is the life-sustaining treatments, which is basically the provision of intensity, or I should say standardized treatments, the usual care provided to patients. And finally, do not resuscitate code status. So my aim in this study was really to extract these 10 elements from EHR notes. And the way to do that is 4 steps, including natural language processing. I started with establishing a language model that learns and predicts words that are really related to the 10 elements. And this helped me to create a dictionary of terms that I used for one purpose, which is establishing the gold standard, identifying the true examples in gold standard corpus, which is step 2. The gold standard corpus is a data set of notes that are, we know, include true notes or true examples of the 10 elements of patient-centered care. And step 3, I experimented 4 natural language processing approaches to predict whether a note includes any of the 10 elements. And finally, I used the labels I got from the prediction task in order to study variations by using multivariable logistic regression. And this table shows the counts of verbs when I started initially compared to the expansion in counts. And I should acknowledge colleague et al. For providing me the vocabulary list for pain, dyspnea, and anxiety. So establishing the gold standard followed a systematic approach. And I mean that we had to stop at 50, 150, and 300 notes, which allowed us really to boost the inter-annotator agreement, which is a measure between of consistency between the 2 raters. So 2 research assistants that I trained helped me to read every note and judge whether it includes any of the 10 aspects. And I ended up with a 87% kappa agreement, which is considered very good. This bar chart shows the counts and proportions of the notes that include the aspects. And as you can see, because I used purposeful sampling of including the 10 elements in this corpus, so the NLP models can learn from, we have many goals of care aspects. But if you select a random sample from EHR notes, you will find less than 5% of any of the individual aspects in the notes compared to the symptoms and pain particularly. And the red line is the threshold. Generally speaking, the rule of thumb is to include 200 true examples for NLP models to learn from, which I meet in this study. The upper table shows the performance metrics of the NLP tasks. And I should say that I use the true labels in my corpus to compare or check the performance of the NLP predicted labels. So I would compare the predicted labels to the true labels in my corpus to calculate several metrics. The most common metric is F1 score, which is the harmonic mean between precision and sensitivity, and testing the 4 approaches, conventional versus BERT, which is the bidirectional encoder from the transformer, which is considered the state-of-the-art NLP system that understand the context, not only the meaning of words, but also the context. And consistent with recent literature, BERT outperformed the conventional methods. So the heat map in this slide shows the breakdown of the precision, sensitivity, and F1 score of each element. And you can see life-sustaining treatments is lower than any other aspect in my corpus. And this is because BERT outperformed the other methods, I used it to label the entire data set, which includes 0.25 million notes for 4,300 patients. And unsurprisingly, you can see that most notes included pain, anxiety, and dyspnea, compared to the other very individual aspect of, such as surrogate decision maker, or you can see only around 2% for prolonging life, for spirituality and religious concerns, as well as talking about death, which really points to the fact that it seems we do not document as much about these items. So the outcome of this part of my dissertation was to really get a structured data, which is basically labels of the 10 elements that I used in multivariable logistic regression to understand some associations between the labels and their documentation and some of the patient demographic as well as clinical characteristics. And what I found, the question was whether patients vary in terms of documentation of these elements. And the answer is yes, there were variations between the patients in terms of documentation of the aspects. Specifically, older age was associated with less likelihood of documenting concerns, surrogate decision maker, and advanced care planning. Patients with the cancer diagnosis were less likely to have advanced care planning and surrogate decision maker documented in their notes. On the other hand, patients identified as Christian based on the structured data from EHR compared to other religion were more likely to have concerns, surrogate, advanced care planning, and symptoms documented. Cancer patients versus no cancer patients were more likely to have concerns and symptoms documented. And finally, having multimorbidity was associated with more likelihood of documenting all the aspects except for the concerns about death and dying. And this chart depicts the odds ratios of the association between multimorbidity and documentation of the aspects. So moving forward to my the second half of the dissertation, I used some labels from my first half to do some inference work. So the study explored the effect of palliative care on receipt of aggressive treatments and goal discordant care in cancer patients at end of life. And we know that the American Cancer Society estimated that there were about 1.9 million new cancer cases in 2021. 20,000 of them were in Iowa. 0.6 million cancer deaths were in the US, and about 6,500 were in Iowa. We know from literature that referral to palliative care is better in terms of patient outcomes, quality of life. However, there are disparities in patient outcomes, especially patient-centered care, especially at end of life. One theory to explain these disparities is the models of palliative care. For example, there is the primary palliative care provided by practitioners, primary practitioners such as oncologists, to the patients without referral to the other model, which is specialist palliative care provided by board certified and trained practitioners who provide really specialized palliative care. Another explanation is the time when palliative care is initiated matters in terms of achieving better outcomes. So I really wanted to look at this phenomenon. So I examined the effect of referral to specialist palliative care on receipt of aggressive treatments and goal discordant care. So in this diagram, top of this slide, you can see that there are two groups of people that I defined based on their structured data. The exposure group was referred to palliative care. The non-exposure group was not referred to palliative care. And I should emphasize that this is specialist palliative care, not the traditional palliative care provided by the primary providers. And in order to test the two outcomes, goal discordant care, which I define as this alignment between preferences that I got from NLP, 3 preferences, comfort, life-sustaining, and DNR, and the actual care that I got from the procedure codes in the last month of life, which is basically CPT codes. I also looked at aggressive treatments using these 4 measures in the last month of life. And in order to balance the sample, so in real world, if we want to test the exposure, the effect of exposure on certain outcomes, we would do a randomized control trials where we would account for covariance by random assignment. So this is an observational study. So I use propensity score matching, which is basically using statistical methods to reduce the effect of covariance, to make balance, to make matching between the subjects based on their covariance. So I followed 4 steps: identify the covariance, obtain the propensity score by running logistic regression on the exposure variable, which is referral to palliative care, and getting the score. I matched the 2 groups, exposed and unexposed, using nearest neighbor without replacement, and I set a caliber distance between the subjects as 0.007. So any any pair who do not have a match were excluded from the next analysis, and I evaluated the balance. And this diagram shows the distribution of propensity score in the palliative care and non-palliative care groups, and the median propensity was 0.55, and we can see both the groups are fairly similar. So I calculated these counts of preferences from NLP, comfort, DNR, and life-sustaining treatments in order to identify the first half of concordance, which is the preferences. The other half of concordance was identified based on procedure codes. That's how I got the discordant care measure. And finally, I measured the aggressive or receipt of aggressive treatment. So as you can see, 17.5 and 16.3 of the patients received discordant care and aggressive treatments respectively. And there are 2 ways to assess the balance, whether it was effective or not. The left diagram illustrates the distribution of the covariance. The white circles represent before matching, the black circles represent after matching, and as a general rule of thumb, we want to calculate the absolute standardized mean difference, and we want to see an absolute standardized mean difference less than 0.1. Anything beyond that is considered imbalanced. And I know this is kind of messy. I just wanted to show you the differences between the 2 groups. Before matching, we started with 2,700, and after matching, we ended up with 2,300, matching 85% of the sample. And the standard, or the mean of standardized mean difference, moved from 0.13 to 0.03. Finally, after running bivariate logistic regression, I found that decedents who were referred to specialist palliative care were more likely to receive aggressive treatments. And as shown in this diagram, the green bar is the exposed group versus the purple bar, which is the unexposed group. The difference between the 2 groups was statistically significant, even in the balanced sample. And another interesting finding in my research is that decedents, the documented surrogate decision maker, were more likely to receive both of my study outcomes: aggressive treatments and goal discordant care, which is really interesting. So to wrap things up, I created a gold standard corpus, and as I emphasized earlier, my systematic approach in annotating the labels helped me to prepare a data set that is really reliable in terms of including the aspects of patient-centered care, which is really important for NLP models to do the classification. I also should emphasize that we had issues with comfort-only measures and life-sustaining treatments. As I showed earlier, they were less in terms of performance compared to the other aspects. And I should say that notes related to these 2 aspects often include comfort and life-sustaining. For example, one patient might say that they are okay with being in ICU, but they are not okay with, for example, CPR or breaking their ribs, which is really an example from the data set. So in this way, we have life-sustaining and comfort at the same time, which is really lead to false positives and false negatives in terms of predicting the labels. And that's why the performance is is lower. But generally, we are around 80% to 90% generally, which is considered good performance. I should emphasize that patients with surrogates were more likely to receive aggressive treatments and goal discordant care. And there is one aspect here to emphasize, which is we know from literature that surrogates are inconsistent with the preferences of patients. And there are theories to explain this, such as the making decisions in times of uncertainty and the emotional aspect of making decisions. Spouses may tend to, for example, choose life-sustaining treatments for their loved others when there is uncertainty, when it comes to death and dying. This is one explanation of such results. The other interesting finding was referral to specialist palliative care was associated with more likelihood of receiving aggressive treatments, which is really interesting. Recently, there was an opinion article that say a decade of funding and for advanced care planning and palliative care, and we still do not see the effectiveness of these approaches in reducing the intensity of care and reducing end-of-life costs. And this is really consistent with that opinion. However, there are several randomized controlled trials that show the opposite. So it's an interesting finding to really explore further in future research. So in terms of contribution, this study demonstrated really the feasibility of investigating patient-centered outcomes at scale using EHR data, established a dictionary and gold standard corpus that can be used in further analyses to look at patient-centered aspects of care and the quality of care generally. This study used a novel approach, which really can provide guidelines to further studies to utilize EHR data. Another important part was the interesting associations, but we need further studies to elucidate the nature of these associations. And the approach of this study may solve issues related to protected data. We know, like, we encourage multi-setting studies, but at the same time, we cannot share EHR notes because there is always chance for patient identifiers in these notes. So if we use NLP to get predictions, to get labels from the text, we can share them across settings, which should help us to do multi-setting research. There were limitations in this study. On top of them is the accuracy of EHR data. There is the general saying that not written, not done, but this is an assumption. Practitioners may tend to, for example, document the most important parts about patient care, the processes. For example, documenting the symptoms might be perceived as more important than documenting, for example, talking about death and dying. So this is a limitation. Procedure codes are subject for error. So I use procedure codes for measuring aggressive treatments. And as I mentioned, because of the burden, practitioners may tend to prioritize what they need to document, ignoring, for example, spirituality as an aspect. In terms of generalizability, NLP was trained on data from one setting. Notes were documented from one group of practitioners who received similar training, maybe. So they may have used the same language. So it would be more rigorous to train these NLP algorithms using data from other settings to see the performance of the NLP system. And finally, I should emphasize the effect of covariates. So the goal of propensity score matching is really to make the balance using the covariates, to reduce the effect of covariates. I included 8 covariates, but there is more covariates that play a role in terms of the 2 outcomes in my study. And in terms of recommendation, I recommend including time of palliative care initiation, which, as I emphasized earlier, is an important factor in achieving the benefits of palliative care. Billing data are more accurate. So a few studies that use procedure codes and billing data and costs that really might be perceived as more accurate approach. It would be interesting to study the effect of palliative care on transitions to hospice, for example, and using death registry data that I could not use in my data set, but it would be really interesting to see the place of death and other variables. I would also, as next step, explore disparities. I mentioned we know from randomized control trials that there are disparities, but it would be interesting to look at the disparities such as race or no next of kin. People who do not have next of kin, what's the status of their patient-centered care and the preferences? It would be interesting to use mixed method study, for example, to further elucidate why there is this association between surrogate decision makers and aggressive treatments and discordance, qualitatively, for example, as a follow-up. And it really would be good to replicate this study, given that the palliative care team at the UIHC might be seen as a smaller group. It would be interesting to compare these results with another larger setting where there is, for example, larger palliative care group, or there is another system, because we know there is differences between the systems and presence of structured data that really reduce the time needed to document. And instead of typing these aspects, there might be drop-down menus and structured data that practitioners can use, which may lead into different results. And obviously, different palliative care referral guidelines that might be used in other settings. And thank you so much for listening. Thank you so much for being here. I would like to thank my mentor, Dr. Gilbertson-White, for all the support and wisdom and being so patient with me. I would like to thank my dissertation committee for their wisdom, support, and patience as well. I would like to thank many collaborators who really helped me during this process. I received a few grants, small grants from multiple places. I would like to thank the College of Nursing People, so my center, the ONRS, the ICTS, the Graduate College with its grants from the Graduate Student Senate and Graduate and Professional Student Government. And last but not least, I would like to thank my beautiful wife, Dima, and my kids, Layan, Rafif, and Hakam, and my extended family for all the support, as well as my friends, Dax, Wissam, Bashar, and Abdul Wuflu last night from Tampa to be here. Thank you so much.